So we'll move to item 7, which is the NPS-UD pre-notification engagement for plan changes 13, 14 and 15. And we have presenting Emily, and Mark might be there as well. Welcome, Emily. And I believe that we also will be starting actually with a presentation on the vacuum sewers, or they'll be incorporated within this presentation as well. And that's from Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. Ike Kleinboss and Emily Allen will present the report, but I understand we're starting with a presentation on vacuum sewer capacity constraints from Michelle Mcdonald.
Okay, excellent. Welcome, Michelle. I'll let you take that away when you're ready.
Just want to make sure that you can actually see my presentation. There's too many windows on my side.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. All right, so this presentation is, the purpose of the presentation is really to provide some technical input into the plan change proposals that will be followed, specifically regarding infrastructure. With the focus being on vacuum sewer system capacity constraints. We've structured the presentation to answer some of the queries already received, and we will start off with explaining the background and decision process that has resulted or has led to the establishment of vacuum sewer systems. We will then talk about some of the vacuum sewer system design considerations and performance issues. And lastly, we will proceed to let you know what our immediate actions are before concluding the presentation. This is a relatively lengthy presentation. I will definitely try to move through it as quickly as possible, but there's a lot of information that we would like to share at this stage. As you're all aware, SCIRT was formed to manage the infrastructure rebuild after the earthquakes. And that included the assessment, the planning, the decisioning, design and construction phases of the projects. Infrastructure decisions were made by the Scope and Standards Committee, and that committee included representatives from both council and also government. The committee made sure that infrastructure projects and decisions would be aligned to the infrastructure rebuild technical standards and guidelines that was specifically developed. The key objective of the guidelines was to make sure that the infrastructure could be returned to the condition that would meet the levels of service that was in place prior to the 2010 earthquake. It was also important that this should be achieved within a certain time frame. Only where reasonable or economically viable would it be agreed to build in additional resilience into the network. So for most, the mandate was to do a like-for-like restoration, and any betterment that we wanted to incorporate into the projects would have had to be funded by council. So comprehensive concept designs were done for both Shirley and Aranui catchment areas. Initially, Shirley was divided into 2 catchments, and many factors were considered during those concept design stages, including land damage, groundwater tables, liquefaction resistance indexes. Consideration was given to the asset age, maintenance history of the assets, and of course the condition that the infrastructure was left at after the earthquakes. Again, only if it was economically favorable would consideration be given to include for betterment. Another factor that was important was to look at the geographical context and the catchment, and specifically to look at the capacity of the neighboring catchments when considering alternatives. Alternate technologies was looked at, when it was considered that it would be an economic alternative or that it would provide greater resilience. The options were evaluated in terms of a multi-criteria analysis where consideration was given to the constructability of the solution, the resilience that the solution would have, the planning and communication that would be involved in the solution, and of course the estimated life cycle costs. The life cycle cost considered both the capital cost and ongoing operational cost, and also provided a benefit for some of the options where it was believed that inflow and infiltration savings would be achieved. The life cycle cost also included consideration for what the capital cost would be for recovering the systems after a next seismic event. These are the options that were looked at for both Aranui and for Shirley. First of all, in Aranui, the first consideration was whether the gravity system that was in place should be replaced. Then there was also, the next option was looking at enhanced gravity, and what that means would be that the gravity pipes should be replaced to a correct or standard slope, and that would have involved additional pump stations and lift stations to lift the wastewater out of the catchments. Then there was considered whether the entire catchment should be serviced by a vacuum sewer system, also whether the catchment should be serviced by a pressure sewer system. At the end of the day, the solution that had the best capital cost and life cycle cost and scored the highest in the multi-criteria score was the decision to install a vacuum sewer system for the majority of the catchment, and for part of the catchment to install a pressure sewer system. That pressure SAP catchment D is in fact the existing East Avondale pressure sewer system. For Shirley, again, all options were looked at: gravity versus pressure versus vacuum. Vacuum again came out as the least cost solution. Initially, it was decided for the largest part of Shirley that enhanced gravity should be done. That would have, however, involved three additional pump stations, 4 lift stations, and even some pressure. That option was then compared with the option to install vacuum sewer system, and of course, again, the vacuum sewer system had the least life cycle cost and had the highest multi-criteria score. So just to close off this part, decisions were made through several meetings, workshops, presentations, by council, by SCUT officials, and by city care experts. Just for interest, as part of the SCUT decision process, NITAU independently concluded that a vacuum sewer system would be the ideal solution for the new Preston's development. And I believe that this likely dissipated some of the initial reluctance that was left to install new technology in Aranui and Shirley, knowing that a vacuum sewer system, the technology would in fact be introduced into Christchurch at Preston's. So to conclude this part, just to highlight again why pressure sewer systems were not installed in Shirley and Aranui. There were many factors, including the need for property owner consent to do works on private property. In other areas where pressure sewer systems were installed, there were several delays to communicate and to agree on the placement of the pump chambers. Also, pressure sewer systems were at that stage regarded in a very negative. For securing council infrastructure on private property is a complex issue which remains to this day. There's also always ongoing maintenance accessibility issues for council infrastructure on private property. But lastly, the cost for installing pressure sewer systems was simply just higher than for installing a vacuum sewer system. And also to note that in the SCIRT times, pressure sewer systems were actually installed without smart controls. So the SCIRT pressure sewer systems, we also don't really have visibility over those pump operations. Nowadays, for the new development areas, we install the systems with smart controls so that we could have better operational accessibility. To look at the design consideration of a vacuum sewer system, we've brought in these two schematics, which shows the difference between a normal gravity system and a vacuum sewer system, where in the case of vacuum, we have up to 4 preferred houses connected to a communal vacuum collection pit or vacuum chamber. This chamber contains a valve that operates pneumatically because of the vacuum that's in the vacuum pipes. And this allows wastewater to be sucked out of the chamber towards the vacuum pump station. Because of the way that a vacuum sewer system operates, it allows us to establish vacuum pipes at a much shallower depth than what would typically be the case for pressure. Then for pressure sewer systems, just want to take one slide back. You note that the operating part of vacuum sewer systems are all established on the public domain side. Whereas for pressure sewer systems, the operating part is really established on private property, with most of the infrastructure even going up, these are the smart controls, going up to the external wall of their house. When SCIRT made the decision, or when they looked at pressure sewer as an option, they did look at the opportunity to potentially move these pressure sewer pumps outside of private property and have communal pressure sewer pumps. But yet again, that would have involved a lot of extra cost and complications with bringing in electricity to service the pumps. So to look at so essentially for a vacuum sewer system, you have all these collection pits connected to ever increasing pipe sizes up to a vacuum station. In the case though of Shirley, there are 3 vacuum mains connected into the station. So it essentially comprises 3 subcatchments. We call it a vacuum arms. So Shirley has got 3 vacuum arms with three vacuum mains entering the pump station. Aranui has got six vacuum arms, and Preston's also have 6 vacuum arms. A vacuum sewer system is really centrally operated. The brain of the operation is at the central pump station. Although we have different vacuum arms and different mains coming into the pump station, there's still just one vacuum connection to create the vacuum in all the arms. Therefore, these systems aren't really independent. They are collectively operated. This is different in pressure sewer systems where we have distributed operation. All these bubbles are the little pressure sewer pumps on each private property. And yet again, they pump into ever increasing pipe sizes up to a discharge point. Again, one issue that wasn't addressed in the SCIRT time was the need for order treatment. Because of the longer retention time of wastewater in a pressure sewer system, our guidelines nowadays calls for odor treatment to be installed at the discharge point. So yet again, this adds cost, both capital and ongoing operation costs, to a pressure sewer system as well. To look at what would it mean to upgrade a vacuum sewer system. First of all, the sizes of those vacuum pipes would have to be increased. The pump station itself, the vacuum pumps, would have to be upsized, as well as the wastewater collection tank that receives the wastewater that's been sucked into it, the wastewater pump station, and the rising mains that then delivers this wastewater to a discharge point where there is capacity. In addition to that, more vacuum sewer valve chambers or collection pits will have to be added, but this in itself could result in a redesign or defragmentation necessary for the system, because again, the more sewer valves you add, the more air you bring into the system. There is also the possibility to bring in several satellite pump stations to essentially bleed off the wastewater out of the vacuum system at intervals. But this in itself will be quite a complex and a large investment that would be needed to do this. Again, because it's not just simply a matter of bleeding off wastewater and pumping it to a neighboring catchment. There's insufficient capacity in the neighboring area. So we're really talking about additional pump stations that needs to discharge to the same discharge point that what the current pump stations are discharging to. This map shows where Preston, Shirley and Aranui vacuum sewer systems are located in the context of where pressure sewer systems are located. So the orange is vacuum sewer systems, the purple is the pressure sewer systems. Most of the pressure sewer systems to the west of the city is the new development pressure sewer systems, whereas these ones on the east has been established through SCIRT. We've also included in this map wastewater capacity constrained areas for gravity systems where there are constraints at present and where upgrades would have to be included to provide additional capacity. One of the things that we will talk about in the next couple of slides is the inflow and infiltration allowance for vacuum sewer systems. These systems have been designed according to the Australia Code for Vacuum Sewerage Code, which does tell us that because the vacuum pipes are actually PE welded pipes, we only need to recognize inflow and infiltration that comes from the gravity part of the system. And that's essentially the part that's the private property part and up to the collection chamber. But inflow and infiltration must still be considered. Our council infrastructure design standards clarifies that and states that when we do design vacuum sewer systems, we allow for a maximum flow factor or peak wet weather flow factor of 2.78 of the peak design flow. This is about 64% of the flow that we design the pipes for is allocated for inflow and infiltration. We have three main issues currently with the performance of mostly two of our vacuum sewer systems. The first being that the inflow and infiltration flow, the maximum flow, the peak wet weather flow, exceeds that design allowance that I've just spoken about. This was a risk that was highlighted when these systems were designed. And essentially what happens when the flow is exceeded is that the air to liquid ratio is impacted, and this diagram tries to show it. So because there's more liquid and less air, the wastewater can't really be sucked out of the system as one would have to have when you have enough air, you can suck the wastewater. So what we call this is that the systems are waterlogged. And as I said, the reason for that is just because the flow is much more than what the pipes have been designed for. And all these results of such an instance, higher vacuum pump rates, irregular air to liquid ratio, we actually do see that in our systems at present, in Aranui and in Shirley, every time that it does rain. This graph shows is shows the operation of the various valves in the Aranui catchment, and it shows the number of valve events, opening and closing of valves over time. Although the ratio of valve events in rain versus dry weather does not necessarily relate directly to flow, it does give us an indication of the degree of increase in flow during wet weather events. For Aranui, we can see that if we now consider that peak wet weather flow factor of 2.78, for Aranui, we can see that the factor has been reached and exceeded for Arm 6, and most likely also for Arm 1. The reason why Arm 1 is not showing as being exceeded is because that as a general standard operating rule, where we have water logging every time that it rains, the rule is that that leg is actually closed out, and therefore we can't see the valve events as part of this diagram. It's also interesting to note here that there's a long recovery period in Aranui after it rains before the valve events come back to normal, if at all it does. The same can be seen for Shirley, where we see that the peak is much higher. And in this case, again, all the arms are exceeding that peak factor. The recovery time is a bit faster, mostly because I believe Shirley is a smaller catchment. The pipes aren't that long. We see even for Preston's, that's a new development area, that there are cases where we see a very high response during wet weather. And that comes back to what we've previously said, is that the inflow and infiltration allowance that's done at the time when the system is designed is really there for not just now, but also for future. As pipes is older and as it is longer in the ground conditions changes, and tree roots can damage pipes, and therefore inflow and infiltration, even if it's slow at this stage, can definitely increase over time, and that's why we have that allowance for future and not just for now. We can, if we look at the performance of the Shirley and Aranui systems of the vacuum stations during a rain event, we can see on this graph, the blue is the flow into the pump stations and the orange is the vacuum. We can see that in Shirley, as the flow increases during a rain event and it reaches the design capacity, the system becomes waterlogged and we lose vacuum. In Aranui, we see waterlogging occurring and vacuum loss even before the wastewater actually reaches the capacity, or the flow reaches the capacity of the pump station. That means that the arms are just waterlogged even before the pump station can achieve its capacity. For Preston's, although you can see that the flow is much lower than the design capacity, knowing that Preston's is still being developed, we are also seeing already in rain events some discrepancies and some vacuum dropouts, which obviously would need to be investigated, but giving us the concern that there may be issues that parts of the system can be waterlogged. The second issue that we have with the performance, or the reason for the performance issues, really is because the vacuum sewer systems have been designed in accordance with the district plan rules at that time, and that is the living one zone requirements. Although the pipes were sized for some extra development, provision was made to subdivide properties into parcels of up to 450 square meters only. Vacuum pits were, however, designed and placed to accommodate the current number of dwellings. Overall, though, Aranui was designed, depending on the arm, for a density of between 11 to 30 houses per hectare. And Shirley was designed for a density of between 10 to 16 houses per hectare. As you can see here, which is a graph which shows the count of the recent subdivisions that we've processed and the density of those subdivisions, that current development reaches much higher density, 70 plus houses per hectare. The minimum density enabled by our existing residential medium density is here at 30 households per hectare. Then lastly, in terms of performance matters, when in 2016 the district plan was changed to zone 30% of Shirley as residential medium density, this decision was made based on a technical memo that was provided even before the vacuum systems were commissioned. And the advice at that time was that there is a potential to increase the number of dwellings for the system, but only if the peak wet weather flow component used in the design is reduced by up to 15%. So it was suggested that a lower peak wet weather flow allowance could be accommodated. It was, however, highlighted that that exceeding the vacuum pump station capacity would result in issues, and also that exceeding the maximum design flow of the different pipes would result in serious challenges. It was recommended that council must make sure that these enabled developments never do exceed the design maximum flow in the arms, and that council should determine after the commissioning whether there's any spare capacity depending on the wet weather response. It was also, I think, assumed at that time that inflow and infiltration could easily be reduced, and that repairs to private property laterals would be done. So we have some issues with the advice that was considered at that time. Mostly because it assumed that additional growth would be assigned proportionate to the theoretical spare capacity of each arm. It also assigned theoretical spare pump station capacity to the individual arms, where we have been recommended not to allow that to happen. It also assumed that that the high flows after commissioning would be easily dealt with. It assumed that the inflow and infiltration rate could be reduced and would be evenly distributed throughout the catchment. And the last matter was that it assumed that the minimum enabled zoning would be achieved, which was 30 houses per hectare at that stage, whereas actual development exceeded that by far. In terms of way forward actions that we are already implementing, we've installed a vacuum sewer monitoring system. So we now have visibility of the operations of the more or less 1,500 vacuum valves in our systems. As advised by our suppliers, we have installed automatic air inlet systems at the end of the vacuum arms that were generally prone to waterlogging. Those automated air injection systems allow us to bring in additional air when there's higher flow, so that the system could actually operate during wet weather. But just the introduction of that air also reduces the pump station, the vacuum pump capacity. Our draft water supply and wastewater bylaws, which is now in front of the hearings, I think, just been finished regarding that, will strengthen our ability to ask private property owners to not just repair, but we can ask property owners to inspect their drains to make sure that it is in good order. And if found not to be in good order, that should be repaired. We can now use the vacuum sewer monitoring system data that we have collected to actually identify the valve chambers which is most susceptible to inflow and infiltration. This diagram kind of shows what we are seeing when we look at the operation of the valves during dry weather versus wet weather, where we can easily identify the chambers that have the most response in wet weather, therefore the chambers where the inflow and infiltration is the highest. We then intend to use our new water services bylaw to require properties that we suspect of having high inflow and infiltration or connected to that specific chamber to inspect the laterals and to repair it. We will also on our end make sure that the vacuum chambers that's in the road and in the footpaths are adequately sealed and that we don't have surface flooding of those chambers. We also intend to expand the vacuum sewer monitoring capability so that we can monitor the pressures at the end of the arms and also so that we can remotely control those automated air injection systems so that we can have better operations during wet weather to recover the vacuum sewer systems when the flow exceeds the capacity. In terms of upgrade or duplicate systems, we've presenting this table as a worst case rough calculation of the implications of what it would mean if the capacity of the systems would need to be upgraded. We've matched this back to the replacement cost of the vacuum sewer systems. Again, this is a non-engineered approach and needs to be considered in that context. So for surely what we have determined, if we were to break the rule of assuming that inflow and infiltration can be used for capacity. So if we assume that we can reduce inflow and infiltration by as much as 50%, and we want to achieve the density that would be enabled by the new legislation, which would be more or less 70 houses per hectare, we would need a system with a capacity of 3 times the existing capacity. However, if we maintain our I&I flow allowance, although ensuring that it's not more than that, we would need a system in Shirley that has 5 times the capacity. The same for Aranui, double the capacity versus 5 times the capacity. Obviously as well, this would give us an indication of pump stations that would have to be introduced should we follow the option to bring in satellite pump stations. It's still quite a considerable amount of wastewater that would have to be pumped out of the areas. In conclusion, when the decision was made to install the vacuum sewer systems, the decision was based on robust decision making, looking at multiple criteria. Life cycle cost analysis formed 25% of that decision. It was a collective decision. Granted, there was a positive outlook that the inflow and infiltration would not exceed the design allowance, and it was also supported by the Preston's development decision. The performance of the systems have improved since we had total failure in 2018. But we must also note that we've had less rain than what we had in 2018. Inflow and infiltration reduction, I&I reduction, will definitely still further improve systems performance to make sure that the systems can operate during wet weather, but it's not necessarily going to add more capacity from the design capacity. So what we are saying is that even if we do bring I&I down to what the systems were actually designed for, we still do not have a sufficient capacity to accommodate the MDRS-enabled development. At best, a density of 20 houses per hectare in Shirley and 25 houses per hectare in Aranui, if we factor in that we can have an I&I saving of 50%. So lastly, we would just like to say that the decision to upgrade or to duplicate or to the vacuum sewer systems will have to be also made in the context of the growth strategy, the overall growth strategy for the city, and applying and prioritizing where the highest return can be given, and that is the number of houses that can be accommodated.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Just before we move to Emily and Ike, is there any questions of Michelle? No, there's not. Okay. Yanni. Sorry, could you use... Oh, yeah. Thanks, Yanni.
We're good? Oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Thanks for the really comprehensive presentation. Obviously, there's a huge amount of thought that's gone into this, which really appreciate. Just one question, which I'm still not quite clear on, is but areas where we've got high groundwater, what's the impact of intensification on those areas if we allow it? The places I'm thinking about are like some of the areas in Woolston where the water table is really, really high.
Yes, again, it comes back to our design allowance. So we provide for the ability for inflow and infiltration up to 64% of the capacity of our pipes. If, however, we have groundwater coming in that exceeds that allowance that we've given, that's where we start having challenges with our systems, overflows, and as we see now, where we're having our vacuum sewer systems not able to operate efficiently.
Sorry, I was just trying to understand, outside of areas that don't have vacuum sewer systems, but have the other new technology, is there any risk around intensification exacerbating any issues associated with that, especially with the high groundwater tables?
Yes, it differs from area to area. So that when I showed the parts where we already have the gravity areas where we've highlighted in red, where we're exceeding capacity of our pipes, definitely. Right. There really does depend on which area we're looking at and what the capacity in that area is. But there are other areas in the city that is also capacity constrained. In some cases, we can handle that in a different manner, or we have more time to bring in projects to upgrade the infrastructure. And it's not necessarily always a complete failure, as in the case of the vacuum systems.
Sure, but just because there's so many documents, are there other areas outside of the vacuum system that we've limited intensification on due to the risk of?
No, at this stage we haven't proposed that it should go forward as qualifying matters. I think Emily will get in here on what the proposal would be in terms of making sure that that the capacity of the systems are being checked up front. But we're not suggesting wastewater to be a constraint for those areas, only for the vacuum sewer areas.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yanni. Tim?
Thank you. Following on from Yanni's questions with regards to the high water tables in those areas, which are also concerning with the high or the flooding with storm events, with the intensification, the development contributions that are given for road upgrades of roading, etc. Are they? I think we really do need to know what the level of concern will be and what the cost will be to the ratepayers of Christchurch. So are we able to get the future risks with those?
Sorry, I'm not too sure. The risk of the...
So we intensify in areas that you've identified the areas where vacuum are used, but you've also identified the areas that are at risk in red, but are not included in looking at having limited development. So
yes.
what?
Yes, we do have a master plan. We do have a plan to that tells us what it would mean to upgrade all those areas, and of course that can be regarded that will have to be eventually brought into the long-term plan so that it can become part of the district development contribution. So yes, we do understand what those upgrades would need to be, but granted that our planning has been based on our current district plan, we really do need to quantify with the new MDRS enablement what the changes would be, and we would have to reconsider the capacity of our systems all over Christchurch. So there's still a lot of planning that will have to happen in order to get a definitive answer of exactly what the long-term cost implications would be.
And realistically, with the time frame which the government has given us, we wouldn't be able to do that within that time frame.
No, that's part of our. But I mean, that's what we do in our planning space on a day-to-day basis. So we will continue to look at the new enablement, understand where the growth will happen, bring that into our infrastructure plans, bring that back to the strategy, and then incorporate it into the long-term plan.
Yeah, but okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Leanne.
So thank you, Michelle. Look, and just listening to you, I just it just reinforces to me the incredible capacity that we have within our organisation for both dealing with these really challenging issues, but actually to explain them in plain language. I found that an extraordinary presentation. And it's, I'm actually going to ask my office to send it to the Ministry for the Environment and ask them to look at it in terms of the advice that they give the Minister in relation to the NPS and also the legislation that was passed. Because I got asked this question, and I'll tell you what, you answered it a hell of a lot better than I did. I just simply said, you know, we don't have the capacity because of the system we put in there after the earthquakes. But you have explained the why. So thank you so much for that. My questions are, I've got two questions. One is the draft water supply and wastewater 2022 bylaw that we're consulting on at the moment. You get to the end of the page and it goes where the council requires a property owner to investigate and rectify a drain, blah, blah, blah. Any repairs or replacements must be completed within timeframes as specified and agreed by the council. And what happens if that doesn't happen?
So then we will have to pursue a route through the bylaws or through the Local Government Act, where we allow through the Local Government Act to do it on behalf of private property owners and recover the cost from them.
So we literally can do that. We don't need to write that into the bylaw. We've got the ability to say, we've asked you to do it under our bylaw. You haven't done it by the time that we said that it had to be done by, and now we're going to go in and do it ourselves, and you can't stop us from doing that. We're going to do it and we're going to send you the bill.
Yes.
Great, that's a good answer. The second question was in relation to when you go back to the assessment that Skirt did right at the outset around the capital costs, the life costs, and the and what you got for the money, and now to look at an upgrade to another system, the difference was between 10 and 20 million at the time, at the front end of the decision making, and now it's about 50 or 60 million. So have I read that right? And if so, why wasn't a potential around that cost, or how did that decision not include potential for increased densities in those areas?
Again, because of first of all, because of this good environment, the mandate was never to provide for future growth. Secondly, there was consideration for some intensification, but never to the extent that we are seeing now. So it was truly based on the environment at that time and the district plan and the living zone standards that was prevalent at the time. And that hand in hand with the fact that we weren't allowed to build in, well, Skirt wasn't given the mandate to build in additional capacity.
No, I thought that would be your answer, and I guess that it does kind of reflect on the circumstances that we were in at the time. But I find it extraordinary that the independent hearings panel was allowed really to operate off the back of a memo, which was a conditional piece of advice. But you can't comment on that because
I can't comment on that.
I'm allowed to say that and you're not. So I'll hand it back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. I actually had a question on another one of the matters in the report, not vacuum sewers.
Okay, yeah. We'll leave your hand up, but we'll just get Emily and Ike to come on and introduce the item. Welcome.
Kia ora koutou. Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. Today we're bringing to you a report recommending that Council commences pre-notification engagement with our communities on proposed plan changes to give effect to the National Policy Statement on Urban Development and the Amendment Act, which was introduced at the end of last year. The proposed plan changes are the Housing and Business Choice Intensification Plan Change, PC14, which is shaping how and where we grow our city by enabling more development within our city's existing footprint. The Heritage Plan Change, PC13, introducing 11 new heritage areas across the city to be identified within the district plan to protect Christchurch's special identity and character, and adding a total of 65 buildings, items and interiors to the schedule of significant historic heritage. And also the Radio Communication Pathways Plan Change, PC15, protecting our emergency radio communication airspace by stopping development that blocks it. We do want to reiterate that a number of the proposals that enable greater housing and business choice are required by legislation. Simply, we have to change the district plan. Also, there is a high evidential threshold we need to meet to support any discretionary proposals, such as qualifying matters. That said, we encourage engagement with our communities now, asking for feedback on the proposed plan changes where we do have some discretion is a positive and accessible opportunity for people and communities of interest to have a say earlier in the plan change process rather than at the more formal notification stage, which will occur later. We're recommending that we have a community conversation about these proposals as a bundle at this time because they collectively shape our city's form and how we grow. And we need to meet the legislative deadlines for formal notification by mid-August 2022. We know our communities well, people know their communities well, sorry. So it's important that we hear from them any suggested improvements or changes to these proposals. For example, if there are any heritage areas or character areas that will add value to this proposal. And we want to be able to respond on a case-by-case basis to these through sufficient evidence to support those inquiries. Regarding the presentation you've just heard about infrastructure issues in some of the areas of the city where the capacity of our horizontal infrastructure network will constrain further intensification. We propose responding to these through considering the vacuum sewer network as a qualifying matter, and to include a district-wide engineering provision certifying connection to Council's 3 water networks. We have heard from you and the community about how important and valued trees are, and your concerns that intensification will result in the loss of trees. Therefore, we are proposing through the plan changes to protect the schedule of significant trees in the district plan as a qualifying matter, and also to introduce a financial contribution to address concern over the loss of tree canopy cover. We consider this to be a belts and braces approach, using all the tools that we have available to us under the RMA. We'd be pleased now to respond to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Sarah.
Thank you so much. And in fact, it's the trees that I'd like to address. So it looks like there's been a bit of an unintended consequence of the NPS-UD in that the few 900 odd trees that we do have protected currently under the district plan will mostly lose that protected status. And so I'm just making sure that we do have enough resources to go through and reassess them for this and with enough time.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, we have a program of work which we're setting up at the moment to enable the reporting levels that we need to meet, the evidential thresholds to be achieved in the timeframes that we have available to us. This is a large program of work that we're scoping up to be able to protect the existing schedule of protected trees.
Yeah, but I understand there's some resourcing issues if we wanted to try and add trees, is that right?
Yes, so the schedule of protected trees will largely fall into the category of other matters under the NPS-UD, and the evidential thresholds for that are high. Yeah. So we will need to do a lot of work to make sure that we are providing the evidential basis that we need to carry those through. And that will involve sending arborists round to have a look at the trees within the existing schedule, which is a large program of work. We are lined up because we do understand how important that is for our district plan and our community. So we are lining up to do that work, but it is a very resource intensive program, and we are limited because of the constrained timeframes and how we deliver that.
But so there's capacity to do what's currently scheduled under the district plan. If there were individuals, rather than the whole community going, oh, I like that tree, can council do something about it on someone else's property? Is there capacity potentially to get a list together of ones where individuals may want trees on their property protected? I mean, they may not, because there's of course value in development. But is there capacity or a capacity to put a list together in case we have capacity, if you like?
Yes, and I think I think it's important to realise that we are going out for pre-consultation engagement, and part of that is having those conversations with our community. So we do want to be receptive to our community as much as we can within the timeframes and the resourcing that we have available to us. So we will respond if those do come through to look at how we can resource that. It may be that we need a second follow-up plan change to address any matters which we can't fit in the time frame that we have. So we'll look at how we best achieve that.
That's great. Thanks so much.
Jane's got a comment to add too.
So just to add to what Emily said, if there is any significant number at all of requests for additional trees, there will not be time, and I think we need to be honest with the community, there won't be time within this plan change process to include those. But as Emily said, what we could do is look at a future plan change process once we've got through these plan changes.
Okay, Jimmy.
Thank you, Chair. First question, because this plan change is very, very important, because based on your report, is implement the NPS-UD and also regarding to the recently introduced medium density residential standard. But today we have heard those four the deputations, particularly second to the fourth, those three the kind of deputations, they particularly concerned this plan change in the huge of the documents, many pages. Even they mentioned it's very difficult to digest, etc. Because they at least cover the plan change 12, 13, 14, and 15, 4 different ones. But based on your the information, particularly emphasize this the pre-notification, the engagement is have a huge benefit. For instance, like walking the talk, and also it's more accessible to citizens. But I just want to know whether at the moment the office resources is sufficient or not, because this citywide plan change, and also need to give the residents community more confidence. This plan change can minimize all those effects, give them more confidence, would like to follow this plan change to go on for our city and our city.
Thanks, Jimmy. You've asked the question. Can we let staff answer it, please?
Thank you. Yes, so we are ensuring that we have the resourcing to support this pre-consultation engagement. So we're working quite closely with our engagement team, and we are looking at how we best engage with our communities through this process. But staff will be available to do this work and engage with our communities.
Thank you. But how about the time frame? Because this is a pre-notified engagement, but formal engagement will be by the 20th August. Am I right? This pre-engagement, how long? This one? How much time?
Yep. So the pre-engagement period which we are proposing will run from the 11th of April to the 13th of May, and through that period we have a number of engagement opportunities which we've scheduled with the community and through our engagement team. We are looking to notify the plan changes formally in July, and there will be a second formal stage for notification as well, where the community can engage through that process.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Pauline.
Yeah, thank you. Mine was similar along the timeline. So then after July, is that when we sign this off? At the end of July, after we've heard from feedback from the pre-engagement, is that correct?
So we will come to council. At the moment, we're scheduled to come to the Urban Development and Transport Committee on the 7th of July to seek approval for formal notification. And that formal notification will occur from the 22nd of July. And we're still working through what the post notification period will look like. We want to work with the independent hearings panel as they're set up so that they have some ownership or control over that process moving forward. But it will be open for engagement for at least a period of 20 working days, and we will take that feedback and work through the process. The recommendation from the independent hearings panel will then be brought to council to seek your approval on that recommendation. And that process must be completed by the 20th of August 2023.
Yeah, and so we won't be able to change the independent hearings panel decision. We can only approve it or send it back. Is that correct?
So the options under the Amendment Act are for any points where council disagree with the recommendation from the independent hearings panel, those points of disagreement will go to the Minister for the Environment, and he'll make the ultimate decision.
Okay. Actually, do you know what? When we go out for the engagement with the public, 11th of April, 13th of May, a chart, a diagram of all that would be really helpful, I think. And I have another question around financial contributions. And apparently we have always been able to charge these, but once this comes into play, we'll be able to charge financial contributions on developments that do not require resource consent. Have we ever charged financial contributions?
We don't currently charge financial contributions through the district plan. I'm not sure about the history of our city plans.
5.14 says we've always been able to, so I was just wondering if there were any situations where we had.
Just to follow on from Emily's response, we had provisions for financial contributions in the old city plan before the district plan review, the details of which I'll need to come back to you around what they were taken for. But yes, you're right, provisions for taking financial contributions have been in the RMA previously.
Well, that's really helpful if you would send something. Thanks, Mark. And I'm also wondering because this actually comes into effect in August this year, these changes. Am I correct? Even though they'll be signed off by August 2023. Correct?
Yes, some parts of this, these plan changes will have immediate legal effect, so they will have standing from when we notify them in July.
Yeah, so does that mean that we could, if required, on a case-by-case basis, have the ability to charge a financial contribution from August this year?
Unfortunately not. So we did seek through our submission to the Amendment Act that the date when financial contributions would have legal effect was brought forward to align with the MDRS, but that was not taken up. And so there is an advantage for early movers there, where financial contributions will take effect when the plan becomes operative, the plan change becomes operative.
Okay, that's disappointing, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Just a question from me. If it goes through the process and actually the government disagree with the outcome of the independent hearings panel, what happens then?
So that won't be within the scope of the decision making for the minister. If the council and the independence hearing panel agree, that content then is operative. That doesn't go through to the minister for a decision.
Okay, excellent.
It's only the parts that the council disagree with that get sent through to the minister.
Okay. And the financial contribution, so that can be done for externalities. Would that include, say, shading?
We haven't got the evidence base prepared to support that, but it is something that we could investigate further. The financial contributions need to be related to an impact of the intensification. So looking at how that will impact on our environment.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yanni.
Thank you. Is council able to consider, I'm just mindful of the deputations we've heard this morning around people's ability to participate in this process because of the very complicated and technical aspects of it. Are we able to consider, and I know we made this as part of our submission to government, some sort of community funding or community expertise that can be put in place through the process to help people?
Yes, definitely. As we move to formal notification, we are investigating a tool called Friend of the Submitter, which is often used through plan changes and district plan reviews, where there is an independent planner which can provide advice on the system and the process to the community. And we've had discussions with MFE on that too.
And what was MFE's view? Would they fund, for example, a residents group to get technical planning expert advice?
MFE are still working through the funding that they're prepared to provide to us to support council through this process. So we need to wait for any recommendation from MFE on that.
Okay, can I just flag to the committee chair that I think we should actually pass a resolution today and send a letter to MFE or to the minister raising that one of the principles of some of the RMA reforms that was proposed was to enable more people to participate, and that there is a need for an urgent resource to be made available to communities to participate in these plan change processes.
Thanks, Yanni. Could you just email email that through, please?
Yeah, okay, thank you. I had two other questions, but I'm happy to let someone else go and then come back to me if you like.
Pauline, you've still got your hand up. Do you have another question or?
Yeah, I do, just quickly, if I may. I'm just wondering the process after we've heard from the pre-consultation, is there an opportunity for us to make changes in this report? Are we expecting to be able to do that in response?
Yes, we will come back to you following the feedback we received from our communities through pre-consultation engagement in a briefing and provide an overview of the information we've received, and that would be an opportunity for some feedback from elected members.
Great, thank you.
Yanni.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm really interested to know, and this sort of came out of the tree response, but also a more general response for people that want to put forward, whether it's a historic character area or other reasons why. As part of the engagement process, is it better for councils to make amendments for what we're going out for the pre-notification, or are we able to listen to what the community says and then make changes as a result? I'm just not quite sure, because I hear that we've got limited resource to do the changes that people might want, like trees. And so just wanted to get a sense of where energy is best focused in terms of the outcomes that some of us might like to try and aspire to. Thank you.
I'll answer that. In terms of just trees, for example, we don't want to create an expectation during the pre-notification engagement consultation that then we can't deliver on when we come to notify the plan change. And just to clarify, the scope of what we're implementing in terms of the government's direction is the areas appropriate for intensification, and we do have scope to introduce qualifying matters to exclude areas from intensification or to reduce the level of intensification, and that's based on matters such as heritage and trees. We're proposing to review the existing schedule of trees for what has got value that we can demonstrate as a qualifying matter, but what is not in scope in staff's view is a wider review of the schedule of trees. Putting aside this plan change, the schedule of trees remains in place in the district plan, and there continues to be rules on pruning and felling regardless of whether a tree is a qualifying matter. But I would be concerned if we open the door too wide such that we get numerous requests for this forthcoming engagement that people can put forward a tree or an item when we won't be able to address it through the notified plan change. And just to be clear, the scope of the proposed plan change is not to open up a review of the wider schedule of trees, and that will certainly be challenged. In any plan change process, we have people come in the door wanting to get in the door and to widen the scope of what we've proposed. But I think any review of the tree schedule we should really be looking at as part of a future plan change, rather than opening the door to any number of new items being identified.
Thank you. So is that, so if we'd done a plan change like a year ago around trees, then we would be able to incorporate that in now, but because we haven't done a specific plan change on tree protection, either adding new listings or changing the valuation method, is what you're saying that we simply would not have scope to do that as part of this process?
The short answer is no, we haven't done the work required to add new trees as a qualifying matter, like we've done for residential heritage areas, for example. But it doesn't preclude us from doing a future plan change and then, as part of a future plan change, introducing that as a qualifying matter at a future date.
How long would that amendment process take?
A plan change would take at least 12 months from preparation through to decision. That's tight in itself. What I suggest we do to move that forward is we come to you with our program of work across affecting other parts of the district plan, and just discuss priorities and how we resource that if council is minded to progress that plan change.
Okay, and just a final question from me is in regards to the character areas. Like, appreciate there's been a lot of work done previously. Appreciate that you've narrowed down the focus. We heard a submitter the other day raise Barnett Avenue, the social housing. We know that there might be other communities around, Rickett and Bush, for example, where people do want greater character protection. People have the ability through this pre-engagement to raise areas of interest and we have the ability to assess those. Is that correct? So we don't need to add them in today, but we could, if people were concerned, they could put them into the process, and then there's an ability to assess whether they should be included.
The short answer is yes. The work that we've done to date is really to validate at a high level the character areas that are contained currently within the district plan. Of course, recognise that there might be other character areas that have merit that aren't currently contained within the district plan. And you're right, this is part of the process, is to go out to the community to validate whether or not they agree basically with what we propose, but also for them to potentially nominate where there might be other areas of character that are worthy of inclusion that meet the same criteria that we've also included within the district plan. And that's why we've purposefully staged the process for validation for character areas, that the more detailed level of assessment or phase 2 will be completed after this pre-engagement period, where we can both validate or further validate the existing character areas that we have, but also validate any nominations that come forward through the process.
Thank you.
Tim.
Thank you. Look, it's just not clear enough for me, because when Yanni asked the question about making changes after the pre-consultation, the comment was feedback rather than changes. So I really want to make it clear, because when we go out for consultation, and we've had it, for some time, that, people aren't listened to. Just to explain, we can make changes to the proposed district plan as it is. Is that correct, following the pre-consultation?
I can answer that. So this pre-consultation engagement's an informal stage in the consultation process, and people can submit feedback. The key difference between this stage of consultation and after formal notification is the scope for us to make changes is not limited by what people have said in this round of consultation. So if there's anything we identify that requires change, we can do that after this initial phase of consultation and up until notification. Upon the plan change being notified before 20th of August, we, upon notification and inviting submissions, the scope for us to make changes, or the scope for changes to be made to the plan change in that subsequent formal period, is limited to what has been expressed in submissions. And so staff, for instance, through the formal process, couldn't recommend changes that go beyond the scope of what has been submitted on. So there's a lot more freedom or flexibility in terms of what we can change in light of feedback in this forthcoming process than when we get to notification and the process thereafter.
Thank you. The second question is, and you mentioned that once the plan change goes through, we can make changes to the district plan. Now, my understanding is that is quite a substantial effort to do that. Can you explain, or maybe we can bring that up later, but I think, as it was mentioned earlier, we've got to be kind of as honest as possible. So it's not an easy process to make changes to the district plan, is it?
The process of, we can make changes to the district plan in the future. These plan changes are in direct response to government direction, but we have a program of plan changes. It's not that we can commence work on new plan changes. We have to follow a process that's prescribed in the RMA, Schedule 1, and that sets out steps that we have to go through, and key for that is having allowing sufficient time. It's a lengthy process and can take at least 12 months for a plan change to go through, and that in itself requires staff to prepare the plan change and then to lead that plan change through the process. So it's not easy in the sense that there's a process to work through, but it's the process has always been there and is with the intent of giving people the adequate opportunity to submit and be involved in the process and to present to a hearings panel, but also ensuring there's sufficient evidence to support any plan change.
Yeah. And as we have a schedule of changes that can take some time. I mean, you mentioned 12 months, but if there's a group, if there's a list of a schedule of plan changes, could be a list of them. So it takes more than 12 months in the sense that there are others in front of that one, if there were one.
That's right. I think, as I said earlier, we'll come to you with a program of what that list of plan changes is. We can commence a plan change at any time and change our priorities around. So a plan change may go up the order in terms of commencing that, and each individual plan change will go through its process either in parallel or following an earlier plan change.
Thank you. Cheers.
Pauline.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to test the appetite of the committee to include another note as per Helen Broughton's recommendation, which I agree with. And I've just got some wording here that would say, these plan changes are a directive from central government and many changes around intensification are not necessarily supported by council. Is there an appetite to include something along those lines there?
Do you want to email that through, Pauline, so we can write it up?
I'd support that, Pauline.
Okay, I'll do that now.
Yeah. Well, are there any other questions? Okay, what we might do is because time's getting on, and I know this is going to create a debate anyhow, we might just have a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll actually get it moved and seconded, and then we'll go into debate. So 11:45 we'll resume. Meeting adjourned.